This is the prologue to Book 1, A Hero's Return. Deep in a forest just outside of Hyrule, a young Link lay passed out just outside of a large tree with a hole about twice his size. Link, you have to get up, Link. Hearing the ominous voice, he awakens to an unfamiliar forest. He shakily gets to his feet. He was still a little disoriented. The trees around him were quite tall, so tall that he could not see the top. A thick fog blanketed the ground, and he saw no one that could have been speaking to him. It was as though he was all alone. All he could remember was his name, his home, and his friends. He had no clue of how he got there and why. Though he still felt a little disoriented, and on top of that, now noticing he was a little weak, he headed for home, whichever way that was. Not knowing which way to walk, he just started heading in the direction he was facing when he woke up. He hoped that led somewhere. After stumbling around for hours, he finally came upon a large log that led to what had to be somewhere outside of this forest. Thinking of his friends and home, he walked on through. On the other side, he recognized where he was. He wasn't home, but he realized he was in the lost woods. Ahead of him was a kid sitting on a tall stump. "Who are you?" The figure looked at Link curiously. Link walked up to the stump and looked up. What he saw was no ordinary kid. His clothing was made of leaves and the bark of the trees. His face was the shape of a skull. "You can call me Skull Kid." He leaped from his perch and landed lightly on the ground. The kid eyed Link as if he might be an enemy. So what brings you here?" The child turned his head in a curious manner. Link moved back at the sudden motion. Something didn't feel right to him. It was as though he met him before, but knowing that he wasn't far from home, he started to talk to the boy. He had figured that if he wanted to harm him, he would have done it by now. "I had woken up in a strange forest with no memory of how I got there or what I was doing there." The kid straightened out his head and began to ramble on about things that Link didn't understand. "So you're the one chosen to bear the burden of time?" He pulled out an ocarina and played a note on it. "The goddesses really know how to pick them." He played another note. He wasn't sure why, and continued on, not caring if the boy understood or not. "You have a long journey ahead of you. In time, you will forget this whole encounter." "What are you talking about?" Link didn't even get the chance to ask him what he was doing there before he seemed to vanish. What did he mean by a long journey? And how could he forget something as random as this? Passing this off as Skull Kid being crazy, Link proceeded towards his house. It felt like he hadn't been there in years. He had finally made it. He was home. He came out of Lost Woods and entered into the village. Everyone was working like they didn't even hear his arrival. Sadly, he was too weak to make it to his house. He collapsed from exhaustion at the entrance. The last thing he saw before he lost consciousness was Saria coming out of her home. He couldn't believe he finally made it. He finally awakens 2 days later to Saria sitting next to him. She had a bowl of hot water at her side and her fairy holding a towel. "How are you feeling?" She felt his head to make sure he wasn't running a fever. "So what happened to you? I saw you faint as I came out of my house." Link could only sit up and shake his head. He couldn't remember anything before he passed out. He didn't know what to tell her. I have no idea. All I remember is waking up with you sitting next to me." He held his hand to his forehead as he tried to remember. Nothing he did could help him, though. Months passed, and he eventually healed. They both lived every day like normal, completely forgetting that incident had ever happened to him. 7 years has passed, and this is where the journey begins, or in a sense, continues.